I think the people are way smarter than their government. There's really exciting news out of Washington, and you may not have heard this, but coming up on July 4th, 3 people can get together inside without a mask if they've been vaccinated. Do you think we should send President Biden a picture of our lunch today? This all begs the question, when are we going to tell the people the truth? I mean, we've so politicized this and made it politically correct that the WHO releases that it's rare, and you have a scientist up there honestly giving her opinion. What happens to her? She's blackballed, and her report that she refers to is taken off the website. When you go to that scientist's speech and you try to click on the link, the WHO has now screened it from us because it said something that's not politically correct. Guess what? It's rare for kids to transmit this. If you go in a room with somebody with COVID, you wear an N95 mask. You don't wear a piece of your cut up undershirt. The cloth masks don't work. When you blow virus-sized particles through a cloth mask, 97% of them go through. But I hear nothing of that coming from you. All I hear, Dr. Fauci, is we can't do this, we can't do that, we can't play baseball. Well, even that's not based on the science.
So very quickly, Senator Paul, I agree with a lot of what you say. I agree with you. I am completely unqualified.
I mean, flu season peaks in February. We don't know that COVID's going to be like the flu season. It might, but we don't know that. But we wouldn't ban school in October. Have you noticed the statistics? 85% of those over 65 have gotten the vaccine. I think they get it. But when you try to tell a 19-year-old they need it as much as an 85-year-old, the 19-year-old goes, well, the death rate's about 1 in a million. For me, it's less deadly than the seasonal flu. Why don't you be honest with me? You might close some schools when they get the flu. We need to not be so presumptuous that we know everything.
So very quickly, Senator Paul, I agree with a lot of what you say. I agree with you. I am completely unqualified.
But I guess I'm not really thinking that I would have expected anything less from the president. You see, the president has sort of a different understanding of the contagion. Apparently, Dr. Fauci has told him you can catch this thing through the webcam. So you've seen when President Biden does a web interview, a Zoom call, he carefully puts his mask on. So I'm just saying, I mean, you could catch it anywhere, maybe even on your webcam. I don't know. This is absurd.
It is, because I live in Miami. There's tens of thousands of Venezuelan exiles living there. You talk a lot about Venezuela in your new book. I get a lot of political ads from the Republican Party. Donald Trump has tweeted this. Many have tweeted this. If you vote for Democrats, they will turn the United States into Venezuela. Do you think that's a fair statement to make?
Well, if you vote for a socialist, you might get socialism.
Come on, don't do that. Neighbors and friends who know this. Don't do this to me.
Got a book out, The Case Against Socialism. You know, Bernie Sanders is no longer alone on the debate stage. It seems like we're hearing more and more about socialism. In fact, 43% of Americans think it's a good thing. You are on the complete other end of that. Tell us about this book.
Well, one of the things we learned in writing the book is a lot of people say, well, we're not for Stalin, we're not for Hitler, we're for Scandinavia. So as we were researching the book, we actually found that Bernie Sanders' form of socialism actually is unpopular, and he would never get elected to anything in Denmark. In fact, the Prime Minister of Denmark, when he heard Bernie was going around saying they were socialists, says, no, we're not socialists. Well, we've now elected people from the Democrat Socialist Party, the Democrat Socialists of America, AOC and the Squad. They're members of the Socialist Party. It used to be people said, oh, well, I'm not really a liberal, I'm a progressive. Now they're openly admitting they are socialists. And people say, well, why do you have to write a book about socialism? Wasn't it debunked 100 years ago? Didn't Milton Friedman and, all the others, didn't they actually debunk? So they did. But if you interview young people right now, 50% of them say, oh, we ought to try socialism. The problem is we've tried socialism. They haven't read their history. Heard of Stalin? Have you ever heard of Hitler? People say, oh, Hitler wasn't a socialist. Well, his party was the National Socialist Workers' Party. I think the people are way smarter than their government.
When you're responsible for protecting the lives of the American people, then what you need to do is to make sure that you use the system the way it's supposed to work.
Here's the problem, Governor. You fundamentally misunderstand the Bill of Rights. Every time you did a case, you got a warrant from a judge. I'm talking about searches without warrants indiscriminately of all Americans Americans' records, and that's what I fought to end. I don't trust President Obama with our records. I know you gave him a big hug, and if you want to give him a big hug again, go right ahead. The guy the Biden administration droned, was he an aid worker or an ISIS-K operative?
The administration is, of course, reviewing that strike, and I'm sure that a full assessment will be forthcoming.
So you don't know if it was an aid worker or an ISIS-K operative?
I can't speak to that, and I can't speak to that in this setting in any event.
So you don't know or won't tell us?
I don't know because we're reviewing it.
Well, see, you'd think you'd kind of know before you off somebody with a Predator drone, whether he's an aid worker or he's an ISIS-K. The Obama administration droned hundreds and hundreds of people. And the thing is there is blowback to that. I mean, I don't know if it's true, but I see these pictures of these beautiful children that were killed in the attack. If that's true, and not propaganda, if that's true, guess what? Maybe you've created hundreds or thousands of new potential terrorists from bombing the wrong people. So you got to know who you... We can't sort of have an investigation after we kill people. We have an investigation before we kill people. I have good news and bad news from Washington. The good news is we are no longer going to be sending stimulus checks to dead people. You may recall we sent 1.1 million checks to dead people last year, over $1 billion. Wasn't a small error, 1 million checks. You say, how can this happen? Well, one way it happens is there's something called the master death file. And there's also the Social Security database. In the Social Security database, do you know how many people are listed as being over 112? 6.6 million. How many people do you really think are over 112? About 5, maybe 10 in the world. So we have 6 million people still listed. In fact, there are 2 Social Security numbers still being used. One fellow was born in 1869 and the other one 1874, and they're still being used. The Senate is considering an infrastructure bill, and I'm glad we are. For too long, Americans have been compelled to send their tax dollars overseas to improve the infrastructure of other countries. I've been fighting for several years to invest the infrastructure here at home. Which is why I find it frustrating that the very people who are celebrating this bill today actually opposed my efforts in the past. We have a short memory here in the Senate.
Hillary Clinton. Over the past week, you've been really critical of her when it comes to the issue of trust, talking about Benghazi, talking about the donations to the Clinton Foundation. How far back do you think is fair game? Do you think Monica? Do you think Whitewater? Do you think the travel office issues? I mean, what should be in the realm of the public debate now?
But I do think that there is sort of a history of the Clintons sort of feeling like they're above the law. They said they weren't going to take donations, for the Clinton Foundation during the period of time she was Secretary of State, and there are questions whether they did. Since then, there are questions of them taking millions of dollars from Saudi Arabia, from the Sultan of Brunei, countries that really have an abysmal human rights record and women's rights record. And so I think it questions the sincerity of whether or not she would be a champion for women's rights when she accepts money from a country like Brunei that stones to death people for adultery, and realize that this is men accusing women of adultery, not women accusing men, because the men have the only say in the legal system in Brunei. So it makes it difficult for her message to appear sincere when she's taking money from these foreign countries. American culture is now normalizing the idea that minors can be given hormones to prevent their biological development of their secondary sexual characteristics. Dr. Levine, you have supported both allowing minors to be given hormone blockers to prevent them from going through puberty, as well as surgical destruction of a minor's genitalia. Like surgical mutilation, hormonal interruption of puberty can permanently alter and prevent secondary sexual characteristics. Dr. Levine, do you believe that minors are capable of making such a life-changing decision as changing one's sex?
Well, Senator, thank you for your interest in this question. Transgender medicine is a very complex and nuanced field with robust research and standards of care that have been developed. And if I am fortunate enough to be confirmed as the Assistant Secretary of Health, I would look forward to working with you and your office and coming to your office and discussing the particulars of the standards of care for transgender medicine.
The specific question was about minors. Let's be a little more specific since you evaded the question. Do you support the government intervening to override the parent's consent to give a child puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and/or amputation surgery of breasts and genitalia? You have said that you're willing to accelerate the protocols for street kids. I'm alarmed that poor kids with no parents who are homeless and distraught, you would just go through this and allow that to happen to a minor. I would hope that you would have compassion for Kira Bell, who's a 23-year-old girl who was confused with her identity. At 14, she read on the internet about something about transsexual. She thought, well, maybe that's what I am. She ended up getting these puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones. She had her breasts amputated. But here's what ultimately she says now. And this is a very insightful decision from someone who made a mistake but was led to believe this was a good thing by the medical community. I made a brash decision as a teenager, as a lot of teenagers do, trying to find confidence and happiness, except now the rest of my life will be negatively affected, she said, adding that the medicalized gender transitioning was a very temporary, superficial fix for a very complex identity issue. What I'm alarmed at is that you're not willing to say absolutely minors shouldn't be making decisions to amputate their breast or to amputate their genitalia. For most of our history, we believe that minors don't have full rights and the parents need to be involved. So I'm alarmed that you won't say with certainty that minors should not have the ability to make the decision to take hormones that will affect them for the rest of their life. Will you make a more firm decision on whether or not minors should be involved in these decisions?
Senator, transgender medicine is a very complex and nuanced field, and if confirmed to the position of Assistant Secretary of Health, I would certainly be pleased to come to your office and talk with you and your staff about the standards of care and the complexity of this field.
Let it go into the record that the witness refused to answer the question. Are you familiar with an Israeli study that had 2.5 million patients and found that the vaccinated group was actually 7 times more likely to get infected with COVID than the people who had gotten COVID naturally?
Senator, I'd have to get back to you on that one. I'm not familiar with that study.
Well, you think you might want to be if you're going to travel the country insulting the millions of Americans, including NBA star Jonathan Isaac, who have had COVID, recovered, look at a study with 2.5 million people and say, well, you know what? It looks like my immunity is as good as a vaccine or not. And in a free country, maybe I ought to be able to make that decision. Instead, you've chosen to travel the country calling people like Jonathan Isaac and others, myself included, flat earthers. We find that very insulting, goes against the science. Are you a doctor or a medical doctor?
I've worked over 30 years on health policy.
You're not a medical doctor. Do you have a science degree? And yet you travel the country calling people flat earthers who have had COVID, looked at studies of millions of people, and made their own personal decision that their immunity they naturally acquired is sufficient. Even the CDC does not recommend measles vaccine if you have measles immunity. The same was true for smallpox. But you ignore history and science to shame the flat earthers, as you call them. You should be ashamed of yourself and apologize to the American people for being dishonest about naturally acquired immunity.
We follow the facts and the science at HHS. We use the expertise of the medical professionals, the scientists at HHS to make decisions. It's a team effort, and we rely on what is on the ground showing us results.
Except for the dozens and dozens of studies, in fact, most, if not all of the studies show robust immunity from getting the disease naturally. This isn't an argument against the vaccine, but it's an argument for letting people make a decision who already have immunity.
We're using the facts, we're following the science, and following the law.
Nobody's arguing the severity of this, but you are completely ignoring the science on natural immunity. So's Fauci, so's the whole group. You're just ignoring it because you want submission. You want everybody just to submit to your will, do as you're told, despite the evidence, the large body of scientific evidence that says naturally acquired immunity does work, is an important part of how we're all going to recover from this. So's the vaccine. But when you add them together, we're at a much different place than if you ignore them. 100 million Americans, by conservative CDC estimates, have had the disease. 200 million or more now have been vaccinated. It's a good thing. Combined together, it's how the disease is. Nobody wants to get the disease. We're not advising anybody to get the disease. But if you're unlucky enough to get it, think of the nurses and doctors and orderlies who all bravely took care of COVID patients. There was no vaccine for a year and a half. They took care of people, risked their lives. They got it, survived, and now people like you are arrogant enough to say you can no longer work in the hospital because you've already had the disease. We're going to force you to take a vaccine that the science does not prove is better than naturally acquired. That's an arrogance that should be chastened.
Thank you.
Mao, 45 million people died from a famine created by the government. The government came and told the farmers they had to go build earthen dams instead of work in the fields. And then they said they had to plant the crops closer. Then they said you had to dig down a meter and a half, 3 feet into the ground to plant the seeds. What kind of moron would do that? Well, governments do moronic things, and people starve by the millions of people. Why is that important? The head of Black Lives Matter, you may be excited about her because she just bought her $4 million home. And her last home, you know, she's not really for a wall on our southern border, but there's kind of some riffraff getting around her house, so she's building a wall around her house to keep people away from her house. But the head of Black Lives Matter wrote a book last year, and there's an interview. A woman comes up to her, and it's a YouTube interview, and they said, "Oh, I loved your book. You know, your book was so good. It reminded me of Mao and of Mao's Little Red Book." In Mao's China, you were forced to carry the book with you. He printed them by the billions, but you had to have them on you or they beat you. But the book was Marxism, socialism, the government owns everything, and it led to famine. But the head of Black Lives Matter is just giggling away saying, you get it, you get it. You understand the parallels between my book and Mao's Little Red Book. So the head of Black Lives Matter is either ignorant of history or complicit with violence.
How many first draw PPP loans have been approved to Planned Parenthood affiliates?
So specifically on specific borrowers, the SBA has not commented on specific borrowers.
Well, I'm asking you. I'm in charge of oversight over your $1 trillion agency, and I'm asking you, how many have been approved?
Well, we don't publicly release that information. And one thing.
So you are in defiance of Congress. You will do what you want, not what Congress wants.
We have provided you a full listing.
You have not provided us with any listing of Planned Parenthood affiliates who've received money. This is an ongoing problem. The previous administration said it was unlawful. This is a big deal. The previous administration said it was unlawful and told them to return the money. Your administration is now giving them money. This is a legal question. This is a big deal. This isn't something you come to Congress and just say, I'm not going to answer the questions.
Not at all. While I can't discuss specific borrower information,
no one is stopping you from discussing this. In your written testimony, you discussed an individual recipient of money through the program. So you are willing to talk about individual recipients. You're just not willing to talk about Planned Parenthood. But there is a legal question here. We want to know how many first draw loans were given. We want to know how many second draw loans. We want to know, since Patrick Kelly, your associate, came here and told us that the affiliate rule has not been reversed. The affiliate rule predated, as far as I'm concerned, the Trump administration. It goes back decades because it was done to protect small businesses. So small business programs were supposed to go to small businesses, not big businesses. So Planned Parenthood has 16,000 employees. The previous administration determined that they're a big business. And yet you continue to give them money, and you won't tell us how much you're giving. You won't tell us if you've reversed your policy. Have you reversed the long-standing affiliate policy that has been part of the Small Business Administration for decades?
No, we have not.
And to show you how bad spending in the federal government is, lizards on a treadmill. So they get the lizard on a treadmill, and then they have active x-rays to look at its joints. They were curious as to why a lizard waddles. So have you ever seen a lizard or an iguana? They walk funny, they waddle. So why do they waddle? You know, what do their joints look like in x-rays? And so we spent, ago, $1.5 million studying lizards on a treadmill. So the NIH spent $2 million in research to see if using a hot tub can lower stress. Really? I think we probably could have just agreed to that. But after 50 years of abuse at the National Science Foundation, we're still studying, will people eat ants to combat climate change? Seriously, that was a study. How many ants will people eat? And how many ants do you have to eat to reduce the global warming by 1 degree? It's a lot of ants. In the NIH last year, they spent $2 million studying whether or not if someone in front of you in the buffet line sneezes on the food, are you more or less likely to eat the food that's been sneezed on? I think we could have polled the audience on that one. Now look, if you want to come to me and say we should study Alzheimer's disease, I've got open ears. Heart disease, diabetes. But if you want to study whether somebody sneezing on the food makes you more or less likely to eat the food, that's just ridiculous.
COVID-16. I am completely unqualified.
Dr. Fauci, I don't expect you today to admit that you approved of NIH funding for gain-of-function research in Wuhan, but your repeated denials have worn thin, and a majority of Americans, frankly, don't believe you. Your persistent denials, though, are not simply a stain on your reputation, but are a clear and present danger to the country and to the world. Gain-of-function research looks like a gamble that civilization can't afford to risk. And yet here we are again, with you steadfast in your denials. Experiments that combine unknown viruses with coronaviruses that have as much as 50% mortality could endanger civilization as we know it. And here you sit, unwilling to accept any responsibility for the current pandemic and unwilling to take any steps to prevent gain-of-function research from possibly unleashing an even more deadly virus. You mislead the public. We don't anticipate the Chinese are going to reveal the virus if it came from their lab. You appear to have learned nothing from this pandemic. Will you today finally take some responsibility for funding gain-of-function research?
You are aware of that. That is called P3CO.
We're aware that you deleted gain-of-function from the NIH website.
Well, I can get back to that in a moment if we have time. The guidelines are very, very clear that you have to be dealing with a pathogen that clearly is shown and very likely to be highly transmissible in an uncontrollable way in humans and to have a high degree of morbidity and mortality, and that you do experiments to enhance that, hence the word EPPP, enhanced pathogens of
So when EcoHealth
pandemic.
Alliance took the virus,
well,
SHC014, and combined it with WIV1 and caused a recombinant virus that doesn't exist in nature, and it made mice sicker, mice that had humanized cells, you're saying that that's not gain-of-function research?
According to the framework and guidelines.
So what you're doing is defining away gain-of-function. No. You're simply saying it doesn't exist because you changed the definition on the NIH website. This is terrible, and you're completely trying to escape the idea that we should do something about trying to prevent a pandemic from leaking from a lab. There's the preponderance of evidence now points towards this coming from the lab, and what you've done is change the definition on your website to try to cover your ass, basically. That's what you've done. You've changed the website to try to have a new definition that doesn't include the risky research that's going on. Until you admit that it's risky, we're not going to get anywhere. You have to admit that this research was risky. The NIH has now rebuked them. Your own agency has rebuked them. But the thing is you're still unwilling to admit that they gained in function when they say they became sicker. They gained in lethality. It's a new virus. That's not gain of function?
According to the definition that is currently operable, the Office of Science and Technology Policy of the White House issued the current policy.
And coincidentally,
I have not changed
the definition
any
appeared
definition.
On the same day the NIH said that yes, there was a gain of function in Wuhan, the same day the definition appeared, the new definition, to try to define away what's going on in Wuhan. Until you accept it, until you accept responsibility, we're not going to get anywhere close to trying to prevent another lab leak of this dangerous sort of experiment. You won't admit that it's dangerous, and for that lack of judgment, I think it's time that you resign.
Thank you, Senator Paul.
Well, there were so many things that are egregious misrepresentation here, Madam Chair, that I don't think I'd be able to refute all of them. Even though we leave open all possibilities, it's much more likely that this was a natural occurrence. Where you say we continue to support research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
You approved it in August of last year.
No, your statement says, quote, I wrote it down as you were writing, you continue to support research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
You were in committee a month ago and said you still trust the Chinese scientists and you still support the research over there. You said it a month ago in committee.
Paul, I have allowed Dr. Fauci to respond. You've had your time. I'm going to give him.
He's going to be dishonest. He ought to be challenged.
Senator Paul, we will allow Dr. Fauci to respond after you've given accusations like that. Dr. Fauci.
Well, I don't have any more to say except to say that, as usual, and I have a great deal of respect for this body of the Senate, and it makes me very uncomfortable to have to say something, but he is egregiously incorrect in what he says. Thank you.
History will figure that out on its own. So
let me finish.
You take an animal virus and you increase its transmissibility to humans.
Right.
You're saying that's not gain of function?
Yeah, that is correct.
This is your definition that you guys wrote. It says that scientific research that increases the transmissibility among mammals is gain of function. They took animal viruses that only occur in animals and they increased their transmissibility to humans. How you can say that is not gain of function?
It is not.
It's a dance, and you're dancing around this because you're trying to obscure responsibility for 4 million people dying around the world from a pandemic. We don't know.
Well,
we don't
wait
know
a minute.
if it did come from the lab, but all the evidence is pointing that it came from the lab, and there will be responsibility for those who funded the lab, including yourself. What we're alleging is that gain of function research was going on in that lab, and NIH funded it.
That is
you can't get away from it. It meets your definition, and you are obfuscating the truth.
Those viruses are molecularly impossible to result
No
in
one's saying those viruses
SARS-CoV-2.
caused the pandemic.
Senator Paul,
We're saying they are gain-of-function viruses because they were animal viruses that became more transmissible in human, and you funded it.
And you
admit the truth.
So very quickly, Senator Paul, I agree with a lot of what you say. I agree with you. I am completely unqualified.
This is the insanity of your government.
This is absurd.
I think the people are way smarter than their government.
This all begs the question, when are we going to tell the people the truth?
Our problem is we think we have a printing press, we have the Federal Reserve, and we think we can just print up as much money as we want and just keep spending it. So when people say there's no place we could cut, we've cut government to the bone and there's nothing left, don't believe them.
And to show you how bad spending in the federal government is, National Science Foundation spent $4.6 million to study the connection between getting drunk and falling down. Now, you'd think that would be obvious. You get drunk, you fall down. But no, we had to go ahead and study whether getting drunk and falling down was something that happens. We spent $4 million if you get drunk, will you fall down? This is insane. The National Science Foundation used $1.5 million to study how to make tomatoes taste better. They spent a lot of money. They spent a lot of time. They wrote up their report, and this is shocking. This is groundbreaking research. They found that if you add sugar to tomatoes, they taste better. So this is a good one. Everybody likes to take a selfie, right? Everybody's had it. If you don't do them, your kids will do them with them, your grandkids will do them with them. This was a study of $500,000 to tell if taking selfies makes you happy. Whether you're smiling or you're frowning and you look at yourself in the picture, does it make you happy? And this was the $29 million worth of heavy equipment that they lost. Can't find it in Afghanistan. But we also made the decision as we were downgrading the war in Afghanistan after the last surge that we did in Afghanistan, that we didn't want the other side to have our stuff, so we blew up a lot of our own stuff. We blew up billions of dollars worth of Humvees, tanks, you name it. Now, the NIH also spent about $1 million to see if they could help people overcome their fear of dentists. Really? NIH spent almost $7 million of cancer research money to create an automatically flushing smart toilet. That's right. And here's the bonus. The toilet will actually take pictures of your derriere from the inside of the toilet bowl, should you wish to have those for posterity. $7 million for a smart toilet. How does this go on and nobody does anything? You know what we do? We flush more money down this smart toilet. We give them more money, and nobody bats an eye. Close to home, and you may have seen it. We call it a streetcar named Waste. It's about a couple blocks from the Capitol over on H Street, and it's a streetcar they spent millions of dollars on, and for years there was nobody on it, and for years it didn't go anywhere. It was a streetcar to nowhere, basically. Spend millions of dollars to find out if drunk fish are more aggressive than sober fish. I'm not going to tell you the answer. I'm going to let you ponder that one. Do you think drunk fish are more aggressive than sober fish? This is your government. This is your money. And this is the debt you're handing on to your kids and grandkids. And this is 50 years ago. Sending monies to countries that frankly don't even like us. We spend about $30 billion helping other countries. Well, you know, if you were going to help your neighbor, if your neighbor was without food, would you first feed your children if you had a little money left over, help the children next door? That's what most people would do. The National Science Foundation, which you'll see is a recurring theme in bad and wasteful spending, also spent about $500,000 to try to determine why rats, monkeys, and humans bite and why they clench their jaw. The National Science Foundation spent $2.5 million to research the effects of daydreaming. The NIH spent $36 million to research why stress makes hair turn gray. I'm at the age, I need to know that one. I mean, really? Last year, we had some great science. There's a lot of great taxpayer-funded science going on. They wanted to study whether or not Neil Armstrong, when he set foot on the moon, whether he said one small step for mankind or whether he said one small step for a man. So it's either one small step for man or one small step for a man. They wanted to know if the preposition a was in there. So they took some money that was actually intended for a good purpose to study autism, and they studied Neil Armstrong's statement when he landed on the moon, $700,000. We looked at some of the money that was being shipped overseas not too long ago, and one of the programs we found was a televised cricket league for Afghanistan. All right, self-esteem is real important, and you're paying for it, so we're going to pay for television so the Afghanis can feel better about themselves watching cricket on TV. First problem is we don't have any money. We've got to borrow it. Second problem is they don't have televisions in Afghanistan. Well, some do, but about 1 in 1,000 people have a television. I guess they're going to feel better about the Americans paying so they can watch cricket on TV. It's one thing after another. We paid $1 million for a variety program to put little songs and skits on their television. Once again, most of them don't have a TV to watch. We spent $45 million on a gas station in Afghanistan. It serves up natural gas. You say, oh, that's great. We're lessening the carbon footprint in Afghanistan. Except for it's completely absurd because they don't have any cars that run on natural gas in Afghanistan. So they built a $45 million plant. The original estimates that was going to cost about $500,000. And it serves up natural gas that nobody has a car that runs on natural gas. So we said, whoops. And so we immediately bought them 24 cars that run on natural gas so they can go to the $45 million gas station and get their natural gas. But that wasn't enough because we had natural gas cars for them, but they had no money to buy the natural gas. So we bought them all credit cards. We bought them natural gas burning cars. We gave them a natural gas station, and we bought them credit cards. We spent $90 million on a hotel in Kabul. Well, we didn't quite get finished. The contractor built about half the hotel. He built the shell of the hotel with no walls. I think he completed one room so he could send pictures home to say he was making progress. The hotel was never built. The guy ran off with like $60 million of the $90 million. The hotel still sits there. And guess what? It's a shell of a building. Our people are worried about the Taliban crawling up in it and shooting down into our embassy. So the next thing is, I'm surprised it's not in this bill. Maybe. Who knows what's in this bill? They need another $250,000 to destroy what's left of the hotel. The guy ran off with the money, and we have the shell of a building. It's a danger to our embassy. Now, we've decided that, I don't know why they even think they need this anymore, because I think climate alarmism has really penetrated all of our education. But just in case there's a child in the country that's not afraid that the oceans will rise and cover the land and that we're all going to drown and that the polar bears are going to drown, we need to make sure they know it through a special video game. So we spent $500,000 on a video app to try to convince our kids that the polar bears are drowning sometime soon. We're just not very good at it. Most of our military don't want to be policemen. They don't want to create countries. They'd soon kill the enemy, come back home to their family. But we kill the enemy, and then we stay, and we stay, and we stay, and we build them schools, we build them roads. I mean, there are some schools that have been built 4 or 5 times and blown up 4 or 5 times by the Taliban. They spent $300,000 studying whether Japanese quail are more sexually promiscuous on cocaine. I think we could probably just assume yes. Most people remember the Bridge to Nowhere. This was $400 million on a bridge and road to nowhere. It served about 50 people in Alaska. Also in Afghanistan, there's been brand new equipment that we send over there that's shredded. They have big, huge industrial shredders. My staff saw them. They found boxes of new equipment, electrical outlet boxes, all kinds of things being shoved into the shredder. So we buy brand new equipment, it's shoved in the shredder. $50 million of brand new, never used equipment has been destroyed. This doesn't even count the old stuff we're destroying. There are reports it's $7 billion. $7 with a B, billion of used equipment. Tanks, Humvees, etc. have been destroyed. Why? Our allies are so unreliable, we're afraid if we leave a tank or a Humvee there, it might be taken by the opposition and used against us. And to show you how bad spending in the federal government is, it gets faster each month as you get towards the end of the year. So when there's only 1 month left, these bureaucrats go, oh my goodness, we might not be able to spend the money fast enough. So spending in the last month of the year is actually 5 times faster than any other month of the year. In fact, in the last month of the fiscal year, not only is it 5 times faster, each progressive day it gets faster. So the last month of the fiscal year is September. September 1, they spend the money like this. September 2 like this. September 3 like this. September 4. It goes up every day because they're trying to shovel the money out as fast as they can. If they don't spend it all, they're afraid they won't get it next year. Do you know how you get approval for your funding? You call up your other buddies that study cocaine in animals, and you say, hey, I've got this great new study. Would you guys like to join in it and be my peer review committee? So it's actually the ridiculous studies that we discover, they're being voted on by people who are selected by the people doing the studies. So what they do is they select other people with ridiculous studies, and they say, we'll vote for yours if you vote for mine. The numbers are mind-boggling. It's hard to conceive of what $1 billion is, much less $1 trillion. How big is $1 billion? Well, 1 billion seconds ago was 1988, and Reagan was president. 1 billion minutes ago, Jesus walked the shore of the Sea of Galilee. 1 billion hours ago, man still lived in caves. But $1 billion ago was just 80 minutes ago. $1 billion ago, at the rate Congress spends money, was just 80 minutes ago.